Welcome to the MAM Journals. I'm here at the NEC in Birmingham, National Exhibition Centre, and I'm actually in the area allocated to Iconic Auctions. Some of you may not have heard the name Iconic. It was actually formerly known as Silverstone, still under the same ownership. They've decided to change the name, but they've been really a growing force in the auction market, certainly on the bike side, since Mark Bryan joined the company and has really added a lot of energy and enthusiasm to it. There's over 240 bikes here, but you'll be relieved to hear I'm not going to show you every one, but I have sort of selected about 10 which I just want to talk about, as well as giving you a general feel for the auction. What we will do, every bike that I talk about, we will put on the bottom of the screen what price it actually achieved at the auction at the end of the day. So it will give you some idea of what prices they were talking about them going for and what they actually realised. There's some lovely bikes here. I hope that you enjoy watching this video as much as I'm going to enjoy making it. Okay, we'll start with this bike. This is actually quite an interesting and in a way quite a historic bike. This is the Suzuki T500. Came out in 1968, which is the same year as actually Honda launched the 754. So it was interesting that Suzuki were still going two-stroke and Honda clearly going four-stroke. This is a well-regarded bike by people who really know their Suzukis. I think these are the right exhausts, because obviously people who collect the bikes, they're pretty interested in whether they're originals or indeed they're copies. This is it's called Candy Purple. The estimate for this bike is between £6,000 and £8,000, and I think it might get that. I think it's a nice example, and they are considered the predecessor to the triples that were to come later. The next bike I just want to show you is this is a 1974 550, 543 cc's. It was launched in 1972, so the successor, if you like, to the one we've just looked at, the 500. These, of course, are triples. They launched the 380, the 550, and a 750, and I'll show you a 750 that's here later. The 550 in America, because this is actually a US import, was actually called the Indy. This, again, I think it's got the original exhausts on it, which is always a good characteristic to see. And now you can see they've changed to single discs at the front, although they're still using this front mount position as opposed to behind, which we'll see on later bikes. They introduced what they call the ram air system, which is a very fancy phrase for a bent bit of metal, which is basically capturing and directing the air towards the heads to try and keep it a bit cooler. Produced 53 brake horsepower at about 7.3 in terms of revs, so weighed 210 kilograms. So went, certainly in its day, probably went a lot better than it stopped. This one is the big brother, the GT750. This is a 1975, and they called that the M. And I've recently done a video, which some of you may have already seen, which is on the 76 version, which is called the A. If anybody can understand the logic between going from M to A, then obviously let me know. It's escaped me, but I'm sure there will be a good reason why they did that. And on the front, they didn't actually lose the braces until the very final year, 1977 of production, and when they went without it. Unusual. I think this was probably one of the first bikes with twin discs at the front. The key characteristic of this bike is this lovely liquid cooled two-stroke triple with the triple exhausts on it, and I think this version produced 67 brake horsepower. They gradually increased them over the time. They actually launched them in Japan in 71 and then to the world market in 72. As I just touched on with the 380, they launched the three triples as a series. The late great Barry Sheen is seen in various promotional photographs with this, but it wasn't really a race bike. although they did do some production racing on them. The arrival of the Yamaha GT750 really allowed this to be in its rightful place, a Grand Tourer. This is a nice one. It is a US import, and the estimate on this is between 7 and 8K. Not quite as nice as the one that I reviewed, but it is a nice looking bike. Looks attractive in those colours. Another Suzuki I want to tell you, because it sort of fits in the chronological history of Suzuki's bikes during the 70s. By the end of 77, they were going away from two-strokes, and they introduced the GS750, and in 1978 they introduced the GS1000. Now the GS1000 really took it straight to Kawasaki, who's by that time their bike had evolved from the Z900 into the Z1000 A1 and A2, and this was actually genuinely considered to be the better bike, better handling and a good spread of power. The bike produced 90 brake horsepower, which was more than the 83 my Z1000 produced, and it's a straight four. It's a 987cc. It's an 8 valve. I seem to remember that they had black covers, but I might be wrong. Memory's played tricks with us. I say it's a 5-speed, and the bike weighs 255 kilograms wet. As you can see on the bike there at the front there, still got those horrible solid discs, but they've now accepted, I suspect largely through their racing experience, that the calipers are better put at the back rather than at the front. So you can see the bike sort of evolving on the road bikes, and they were learning this because, I mean, they got the bikes in the AMA series. They were really fast bikes, but they handled like shopping trolleys and were terrifying at flat out speed, which the race guys could do. You know they're terrifying when professional racers tell you they feel dangerous. Interestingly enough, a few years later, they banned 1000cc's and they went to 750s and told the manufacturers you need to sort out the chassis and the brakes before we allow you to play with that much power. Probably a good decision. The next bike I wanted to show you is this is a Yamaha LC350, and they made those bikes for quite a long time. They first came out in 1980, because if in California and various other places they were sort of getting a bit anti two-stroke, certainly in parts of America, then the LC was really beginning to be aimed at the European market. They began production on the LCs in 1980, and the first ones, I think until 1986, were actually built in Japan, and then from 86, I think as far as 95, they made them in Brazil. This is a 1989 version, and they started at 47 brake horsepower, depending on which market you actually took it to. But this is called an F2, and that, I think, produced 63 PS at 9,000 revs, and it also produced 50 Newton meters of torque. So it's actually quite a brisk bike, because it's pretty light. It's only 155 kilograms. I think nowadays some of the heaviest things on the bike are the riders. At one point, the whole LC market got ridiculously hot, and whilst the really nice ones of the right type are still worth very good money, sort of 10-ish and maybe a bit more on the right day, I think there's been a bit more caution coming into the market for bikes like this, which are rideable as well as collectible. These exhausts, they look very different from the earlier models, and they almost look like, I'm going to call them microns, which was an aftermarket sort of system you could get. But if you look on them, they actually give a Yamaha part number. So either they are original, which would be great, or they're a very close to replica. I think they're original, personally. This bike, I wanted to show you this because it's a bit of a personal memory. I remember at school in 1973, one of the boys bought in a brochure from the Honda shop about this bike, an SL125. Now at the time, on my bedroom wall was a poster of a Kawasaki Z1, but even I recognised at that age that I wasn't going to be starting on a Z1, and I thought this was a cool little bike, and it's great to see one again. They weren't exactly fast, 12 brake horsepower from memory. It will do 63, 65 miles an hour. It's the sort of thing you're very tempted to sort of buy because it'd be a nice trip down memory lane to have in your garage, but I suspect 12 horsepower and might have reduced in 5 decades, and certainly I've managed to put on 5 stone, so realistically I suspect it's something I should avoid if I can help it. But good fun, and an interesting stage of the history of these sort of dual purpose bikes. Very quickly after this they introduced the XL range, which was a bit more purposeful off-road, and indeed a few years after that they brought out XRs, which were more competitive based for the enduro style world. So this in a way is, this and the Yamaha GT750 were really sort of predecessors to the world famous BMW GS, which was a natural evolution. They went through sort of Yamaha 500s, bigger bikes, and suddenly BMW had this idea in 1980 to come out with a dual purpose bike, GS, Gielander, Strauss, terrain and street, and shocked the market with that. The rest, as I say, is history. The bike was sort of semi-serious in terms of trail riding. It's not an off-road bike, but you know, the 21-inch wheel at the front and the 18 at the back sort of suggests that they were hoping you might do the odd dirt track. And of course in America, farm tracks cover enormous parts of the country, so perfect thing for sort of popping into town on. The estimate on this bike is between £2,000 and £2,500. If I was looking to buy a trail bike, this is probably more realistically what I should be looking at. This is the Yamaha 400. It's a 1977 bike. By that point they'd gone to the monoshock. It's obviously a single cylinder 2-stroke. It produces 21 brake horsepower at 5,600 revs, do about 84, 85 miles an hour, and I'm sure virtually all of them will have done however fast they went in their life, because that's how we used to ride bikes in those days. Again, very similar to Honda, they used to sort of describe these in some of the brochures as enduro, but if you wanted a Yamaha enduro bike, you bought an IT 400, not a DT. But good fun, nice bikes. So many of us learnt how to ride on these. This was described, this is an original exhaust described in good running order, mostly original, unrestored. It's a UK registered bike. They think that'll probably be 3,000, 3 to 4. Not sure I'd want it owing me 4, but certainly at 3 might be a bit of fun. This is the other 750 kettle, or water buffalo as some markets called them, that's in the sale today. This is an American bike and imported about 2015. Looks largely unrestored and largely original. It's showing 10,000 miles on the clock, and they're estimating this between £6,000 and £8,000. So really nice GTs are probably getting up to the 10 mark, but these nice original bikes, not perfect, seem to be about that 6 to 8. I wanted to talk about this one, again a bit of a trip down memory lane for me. This is a mid-80s, I think it's probably an 84, Husqvarna 500 DE. It's a 2-stroke bike, but it is rather special in that it's unusually a 3-speed automatic. They think this bike has been unused, so it'll be rare in that regard. So I think this is a rare collectible bike. Husqvarna's history in enduro racing and indeed motocross racing in the 60s and the 70s and later on enduro is, you know, hard to beat. they've won more championships than you can wave a stick at. And the reason why it's a trip down memory lane for me, I actually, in the early 80s, I used to race a Husqvarna, very badly, by the way, but with lots of enthusiasm, if not much talent. And I used to race the CR240, which was a motocross bike, which we converted to put lights on it, because their enduro bikes were called the WRs, but this is quite a specialist bike. And looking at the height of it, I'm trying to work out whether the bike that I raced was a bit shorter or I've shrunk in the wash. It's one of the two. I don't think I ride it, I don't think I can get on it. Interestingly, the Husqvarna brand, they're made in Sweden. Husqvarna is a place, and they've been in bike production for an extraordinary length of time, and they have a connection to the armaments industry, like the Birmingham Small Arms Company, or BSA as we know them, and Royal Enfield, where they were built like a gun. 1903 was their starting point, and they used to make rifles originally. A bike that I felt I had to show you, because I've got such personal memories of it, is this RD400. This is a 1976 bike, and they're 398cc. It's a nice bike. It's the UK from new. It's somewhat unusually got this original American specification rack on it, which, I'll be honest, is not to my taste, but maybe take it off and put it on a shelf and put it back when you sell it again. But we're all different, that's fine. I had great fun on one of these. I had the slightly later version. I had, I think mine was an E or an F. It was a red and white one. A story against myself. I remember actually running out of talent around a corner and hitting a curb and riding up the side of a bus shelter. And as I went up the curb, I knew I'd flattened both the wheels, because that was pretty, and I was doing a handstand, and I remember thinking at the time, well, should I let go? And as only 20-year-olds can think, I thought, I've only got third-party fire and theft, I better hang on. And then I'd calculated that obviously, as a result of being poised up in the air, gravity would come in effect, and I would end up landing back on the tank. And that would probably be quite a painful experience. And indeed, it was. But I picked my line first, rode up the side of the bus shelter, having landed back on the tank and my eyes filled with water. And I ended up with 2 new wheels, and we blew the dent in the tank, which came out a lot less painfully than it went in, with an airline. So I've got very mixed but mostly fond memories of an RD400. Great fun. And they were known at the time as hooligans bikes, and I don't know, I'd like to think we weren't hooligans, but we certainly, my friends and I, we definitely had a couple of loose wires. They're estimating this between 8 and 12k. And so it's a UK bike. They produce 44 brake horsepower. They're twins, air-cooled, 41 newton meters of torque. Mine used to do, back in the day when we didn't worry about such things, it used to get to 110 on the clock, but I suspect in the real world that was probably 105, 106. So we looked at a later 350 LC a moment ago, and this, I want to show you this one because it's a good example of something slightly different. This is a very early bike. This is a 1982 bike. This bike is actually fitted with what's called the 4LO engine. It's a 47 brake horsepower, obviously liquid cool, twin, 2-stroke, and these are again standard exhausts in this back finish. This is a really nice example. Its little brother, the LC350, is certainly contributed to the demise of us being able to ride 250s with L plates on. They were pretty brisk bikes. These Honda 754s, the Fs, were virtually the end of them because they were working on the V4, the one with the chocolate cams, if people can remember. And I actually had one of these. I had what's called the F2 version, so it had a sort of 3/4 sports fairing on it. I had some great fun on it. We went away a few times, and I do remember in my time They don't jump very well over humpback bridges, but it was very amusing because my friend was on the back with a guitar at the time, so we managed to part company mid-air, but fortunately, physics being what it been, he eventually caught up with me. He wasn't best pleased. They're nice bikes. They were feeling a bit old when they were new, if you know what I mean, at that time, towards the end. But as I say, good fun, handled pretty averagely. And I think the prices are still pretty muted on these bikes, really, because although they were towards the end of them, they're not really considered a fantastic version. As I say, these bikes are, this one is towards the end of the run. The earlier ones are considered much more collectible and valuable. Certainly the 1968 versions with the sand castings are eminently collectible. But I think this is estimated between £3,500 and £5,000. It'd be a lot of bike for somebody, and I guarantee it will probably handle as badly as it did when it was new. I actually really like these Yamaha GT750s. As I say, enduro is a slightly optimistic description, but they were good fun and great bikes in their day. One of the earliest sort of trail bikes to come out, along with the XLs. Sold extremely well in America. One of the bikes I could be tempted to have in my garage is actually one of these 999Rs. They weren't popular when they came out, in fairness, but they've certainly grown on me. I actually saw one go through the auctions here, which was like a no mileage bike, straight out of the crate, and that went for record money at the sales. I can't remember what it is. I'll try and pop it on the screen if I can find it. These bikes are estimated between, I think this one's 10 to 15, and this one, slightly nicer, is 15 to 20. You could get them for about £10,000 a couple of years ago, so they're definitely a bike that's on the rise. I've talked about one of these, the Benelli 756, which is what C is in Italian, De Tomaso bike, and it was sort of launched several years before it was available, and it's 1.5 Honda engines in there, so interesting bikes. They've not reached huge amounts of money, but they've certainly got a cult following. Yeah, some of you will know that I've got an SP1. I've actually made a couple of videos on it over the last couple of years. Here's one that's not quite as well looked after as mine. They're an interesting bike. They've never reached sort of stratospheric prices, and clearly this restoration project will be for somebody. It will be a labour of love. I can't imagine that there'll be any money in the end after it's been done properly. But they are a very historic bike, a very iconic bike. It was the VTwin that Honda didn't want to build to win the World Superbike Series with Colin Edwards, and of course they did in 2001 and in 2002 with the SP2 version. This is, for the anoraks amongst you, this is what's called a Y version, because it's got that mounting there. The 2001 bike didn't have that on it, so I can just tell at a glance, but it's seen better days, sadly. It's a lovely V-twin with gear-driven cams. Sounds wonderful when it's going. This is a 1985 XL, the 600. They got bigger over time. The XLs came out in 74 from memory. Might be 1 year either side, but certainly about that when they went from the SLs. And I actually had an XL 600. I didn't have this version. I had a slightly earlier version, which was in red and black, and we've still got the little decompressor valve to stop it spitting your leg off or throwing you over the top of the handlebars. It was great fun. Enjoyed riding it. Perfect in the winter. Easy bike to work on, to adjust the valve, various other bits, and historic, really. This is an American bike, and that's finished in the original, I think it's called Candy Red. As you can see, keeping in with bikes at the time, it's got the drum at the rear and single disc at the front with the caliper, as I would say, in the wrong place, i.e. out in the wind. I remember as a young boy seeing a slightly earlier version of this, a 1973 version, and really being taken by these green dials. It was a 12, 13-year-old boy's delight, and suggesting that it did 150 miles an hour. Optimistic but encouraging. I've been forced by Stuart at the other end of the camera to talk about, he likes these monkey or gorilla bikes. This is the gorilla version. They are popular. Personally, I'd rather walk, but we are all different, and I've always respected that. They go for quite good money. This is estimated at between £1,500 and £2,000. Obviously, when we edit these videos that I make, I have time to sort of reflect on the time we've spent and what I've seen. I thought the auction went quite well. I would sort of guesstimate that between 70 and 75% of the bikes sold, which is pretty good really, because we are in recessionary times. The top price achieved in the auction was actually a bike that I didn't cover because it's a British classic bike, which I don't feel I can add much value to by commenting on, but it was a Bruff Superior, which is a bike that went for £241,500. So clearly there's money out there for serious collectors. At a more sort of down-to-earth level, I was very pleased to see the blue early RDLC go for very good money. You know, it was a nice one, and it's nice to see that they are still holding their value well. Personally, I did have a little run at the DT400. I think I got up to about £3,000, which is what I felt I wanted it to owe me, but somebody was just a bit keener, and I let it go. But I should have probably bought that Yamaha GT750 Enduro, of course. That would have been a bit of fun, but maybe next time. I think Iconic are doing quite a nice job in this market. They seem to manage that difficult job of getting a foot in both camps. They can to get very good prices for some of the British bikes, but they've also got a fair amount of interest and buyers coming to look at the Japanese and European more modern classics. And there was actually a lot of Ducatis at this particular sale, and in particular 916 based bikes, over 20 of those I think, which is a lot of bikes to find a home for on one day. But sadly there was a collection in there because a collector had sadly passed away, so that sort of created more bikes than there were buyers. So not all of them sold, but many did. And there was a very nice 996 SPS, which went for 20,700. I think Iconic are doing well with these Ducati markets. They seem to have attracted the buyers to come and look at what they've got, which is good for the future. I also sort of reflected as I did, because it's auctions like this are of course a trip down memory lane, and I remember fondly my well-spent youth when we all used to buy these sort of bikes in our 20s, and we were full of exuberance and significantly less safety conscious than we are now. I always think it's slightly ironic that the bikes I ride nowadays have got far better power, brakes, suspension, tyres and just general technology, but I somehow managed to ride them slower. So one of the joys of life. But I really enjoyed today. It was good to see people enjoying themselves and meeting with a shared passion. Good fun. Clearly you can see I'm surrounded by a forest of bikes. It hasn't been possible to cover them all, but I do hope that you've enjoyed the ones that I selected to talk about. And we are actually going to be back here at the NEC in a couple of weeks' time, when we'll be covering the Motorcycle Live show and talking about the new bikes arriving in 2024. So if you have enjoyed this video, perhaps you'd be kind enough to press like or subscribe. But most importantly, what I hope that you do is you ride safe and you stay well.